This video is sponsored by Opera.
Thanos should have killed all of us.
Yes, if you've been paying attention to film and TV discourse lately, it's likely you've come across a large number of people expressing their annoyance over the overabundance of stories that use the multiverse as of recent. What originally came off as an innovative way to tell creative, character-focused stories only a few years ago, has very quickly developed a poor reputation due to many popular IPs mishandling the concept of lazy stories and over-reliance of fan service, and for making storylines much harder to follow than they would have been without its inclusion. Even though there have been a lot of incredible stories told and still being told using the multiverse, the shoddy handling of it as it began to hit the mainstream has turned this once creative and fascinating concept into an eye-roll worthy writing crutch, and I've gathered plenty of IPs to use as positive and negative examples. Before we hop into today's interesting topic though, are your daily online routines being made annoying and frustrating by a less than optimal browser? You deserve better. Well, thanks to Opera, the sponsor of today's video, you can rest knowing your browsing needs are fulfilled and enhanced with a plethora of quality of life features. Opera is a faster, safer, and smarter alternative to default browsers that has shined a light into my soul, providing you with an easy-to-use interface and plenty of useful features to maintain your privacy/security and for assisting with everything you do online. This includes a built-in free VPN and ad blocker to help protect your privacy and avoid intrusive ads while you browse, music players for Spotify, Apple Music, and more, instant access to messengers such as WhatsApp, Telegram, and Facebook Messenger, along with integrated browser AI built seamlessly into Opera's sidebar. In addition to this, and this is possibly my favorite feature, tab islands allow me to fix my frustrating browsing habits by cleanly organizing my search results into different islands, letting me stay focused and relaxed while researching and making me far less susceptible to having an aneurysm when I'm gift shopping across Amazon and eBay with a Markiplier video in the background. I love it. If these features sound like essentials to you, and believe me, they absolutely are, and you'd like to give Opera a try yourself, click the link in the description below to download today and drastically improve your everyday browsing experience. Thank you to Opera for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to business. Okay, so I know Burback did a video on multiverse fatigue, mainly focusing on Marvel, and it was pretty good and made some excellent points. Braxton made a video about the multiverse too, and that was also a video, so now I'm gonna give it a try. So picture this, I'm at home, mind-blowing, right? And I'm watching Invincible Season 2, been waiting on it for a while, it's a little slow, but it's still pretty good. But as I'm watching it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the multiverse being introduced was annoying me, and this is not Invincible's fault at all. Given how long the comics have been around for, it's impossible for them to be trend-chasing, and they did a damn good job with it. And it was at this point I realized that there is a large suffocating oversaturation of multiverse stories going on right now that was having an impact on my judgment, and seeing people who aren't familiar with the Invincible comics absolutely flipping their shit at the idea of the multiverse in Season 2 proves to me that this is not just some random unexplainable reason I have for feeling bitter about something. The multiverse as a writing concept has been used for decades now, especially within the realm of superhero comics, with it being one of the most effective ways to tell crossover stories and to circumvent issues in the plot. However, within TV and film, the concept didn't start to become super utilized in the mainstream until the early 2010s, and I'm just gonna Rick and Morty. It was Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty was one of the first mainstream shows that made frequent use of the multiverse in unique and creative ways, either for the purpose of being disturbing, genuinely fascinating, or just to tell stupid jokes, which is what happened 8 times out of 10. Rick and Morty is still incredibly popular to this day, and it's important to mention it when discussing the eventual oversaturation of the multiverse. Then towards the end of the 2010s, namely 2018 and 2019, during the height of the popularity for comic book movies, there were 2 popular films in particular, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and Avengers Endgame, that had their entire plot lines revolve around the usage of the multiverse as a concept. For Avengers it was technically time travel, but they were going to alternate universes set in the past, and that is the most I'm getting into it because that film's plot is a fucking mess. I don't think it's a stretch to say that these were the first 2 mainstream movies to introduce the multiverse as a fleshed out concept to general audiences, and there's no doubt that people really liked the idea and were craving more multiverse stories after being exposed to the possibilities for the first time. And because Spider-Verse was one of the best films of 2018 and Endgame is one of the most successful movies of all time, you can see where this is going. A lot of people were aware of the multiverse now, and it explains why going into the 2020s things started to go wrong. While it is silly and wildly unrealistic to say that these properties are responsible for the explosion of multiverse content we've gotten in the 2020s, it's 100% valid to suggest that all of these multiverse stories releasing so close to each other after a slow decade of build-up, followed up by 2 critically praised and popular movies that introduced the concept to millions of people, you know, it may be a little reasonable to suggest that people felt the concept was oversaturated, especially given how after Endgame, Marvel went all in on the multiverse for the next saga of the MCU and proceeded to destroy itself as well as the interest of audiences. But along with this, plenty of people have their own critiques of multiverse stories that largely stem from how a lot of properties have been treating the concept without a whole lot of care, how it can be used to nullify the stakes of the story, how confusing some stories can become due to there being vastly different explanations and rules as to how the multiverse works, and how despite having the ability to go literally anywhere and create any world they can imagine, very rarely do these mainstream multiverse stories do anything creative with the concept. And then there's also how hollow and corporate the whole concept concept feels nowadays, as big studios see it as a money printing machine to reel in audiences based on the superficial delight of getting to see their favorite characters cross over with each other, resulting in completely sterile, pandering slop that tries desperately to please a crowd, only for there to be no one in sight once they catch on. There's a lot of reasons as to why people dislike the multiverse now and why multiverse fatigue is a very real thing. So I started thinking about the sheer quantity of multiverse stories we've received recently, gathered a few examples I found relevant, and sought to compare them all side by side. There are genuine exceptions here that prove how with enough effort and passion for telling character-focused stories, you can absolutely make a good film or TV show of the multiverse as the creative beast of a concept that it's meant to be, as opposed to throwing a bunch of characters together and expecting the entire theater to soy pog at the screen while you puppeteer the bodies of dead people. Do you think David Zaslav held Tom Cruise at gunpoint until he approved of his cape shit? I'd like to preface the rest of this video saying that this is not a super serious video essay. I just think this is an interesting topic to talk about. So without further delay, let's have a look and try to discern the multiverse problem. I did the thing. There's not a whole lot to say here, so I'll try and keep it brief. I've talked about Rick and Morty a handful of times now on this channel, not for particularly good reasons, mind you, but it's important to note that while the quality of the series as it's gone on can be debated endlessly, it hasn't changed the fact that its usage of the multiverse has remained consistent, and it's hard to say that people are tired of the fact that Rick and Morty use the multiverse. They're tired of Rick and Morty in general, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The show has always been about traveling to different universes and using that as a springboard for jokes and character-focused plotlines. It's never trying to deliver fan service in an excruciating manner, and it's not as if the series is even remotely confusing, and when it originally aired, it's hard to say there was anything like it on TV at the time, constantly taking advantage of its premise to produce a large number of stupid and silly but creative and funny characters along with a never-ending supply of creative worlds to go to. Whether you like the show or not, Rick and Morty is still a fine example of a multiverse story. However, disregarding how the show handles the concept, the perceived gradual decline of the series in the eyes of many viewers, again debatable, not the subject of this video, coupled with its immense popularity and status in pop culture, along with the fact that it's been running for a decade now, is understandably added to the current day oversaturation problem. Also, there's still an understandable stigma surrounding the series due to some events that happened back in 2017. I'm sure I don't need to repeat them, but overall Rick and Morty gets it right. You've no doubt heard thousands of people praise Spider-Verse and everything it gets right, so I'm not gonna bother. Instead, I'll happily discuss its impact. Spider-Verse is special because it uses the multiverse not just for massive blockbuster spectacle, but to tell a character-driven story, and it's this approach that I f with the most. Into and Across are without a doubt the best portrayals of Miles Morales across all Spider-Man media, and the way they utilize the multiverse to give a deep character study of Miles, his identity as Spider-Man, along with the concept of what it actually means to be Spider-Man, is absolutely brilliant. And while yes, there's a lot of appeal in seeing many iconic alternate versions of Spider-Man from the comics make their appearance in these films, they aren't trying to shock you. There's no 5-second awkward pause for audience approval, and these characters only help to reinforce the narrative and add to the character work as Miles decides what Spider-Man he's going to be. There's nothing wrong with creating these large, grand-scale epics involving the multiverse and a lot of crossover characters. It can be good entertainment, if done well, but making sure your story isn't just hollow spectacle and then utilizes the multiverse in ways to help assist the narrative and characters, while still allowing yourself to go crazy with the possibilities, is my preferred way to go about it. Out of all the IPs I have written down, and even in the climate that's incredibly oversaturated, no one ever complains about Spider-Verse when talking about said oversaturation. And while that's likely because the movies are just that good, it's also likely because you go into Spider-Verse expecting a multiverse story. Shows or movies that suddenly develop multiverse plotlines or elements can be a welcome surprise at best, but when they begin to consume the story, they better be tightly written or else people are going to turn quickly. And I cannot think of any other way to transition to the absolute failure that is the current day Marvel Cinematic Universe. This is it right here. This is the largest reason as to why people across the globe are feeling multiverse fatigue. It all stems from the biblical f***ups of the most popular movie franchise of all time. The MCU has been struggling ever since Endgame, as they've now moved past the Infinity Saga and are now going all in on this new multiverse saga. Endgame was already playing with fire when they went for time travel, but it was time travel in the sense that they just hopped into different universes in the past and proceeded to mess with them, finally introducing the multiverse into the MCU. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with Marvel wanting to go full multiverse after Endgame. These are comic book movies after all. However, Marvel's biggest problem is that they are constantly producing new content. What makes the MCU so hard to follow now is the sheer quantity of Disney Plus shows that you need to watch in conjunction with the films in order to get a grasp of anything that's happening in the story. While some entries stand on their own better than others, all of these properties are going to inevitably come together for the next Avengers film. Heck, scratch that, they're already crossing over. There's just so much content to keep track of now, and that would be one thing if the majority of these shows and movies were any good, but it's no secret that the recent output of the MCU has been far from stellar. Actually, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, the MCU is utter wank right now. I stopped watching and keeping track of the MCU after Guardians of the Galaxy 3, because despite that film's plot being indirectly sabotaged by the Guardians' inclusion in 2 Avengers films, they were some of the only films in the MCU that told self-contained stories that you could still enjoy and be emotionally invested in without having to have like 5 other movies as required viewing. The rest of the MCU outside of that has been suffocatingly bad. There is too much content and so much of it is just complete trash, because they're always hoping to go all in on the big crossovers and are deliberately making the quality of these other entries worse because of it, and they do not stand on their own. And coupled with the fact that these new entries are being further muddled by multiverse gibberish and setting up Kang as a new villain of this franchise, which good luck with that by the way, it's more than fair to say that the current state of the MCU storyline is incredibly messy and borderline unsalvageable at this point. That's not even mentioning the completely hollow and desperate fan service. If they just let Sam Raimi make a Doctor Strange horror movie like he wanted, I guarantee we wouldn't have had to interrupt the plot for 10 minutes just to show a bunch of random Marvel characters for people to point and cheer at in theaters.
We should tell him the truth.
So this is how cinema dies. With mountains of soy. No Way Home is a frustrating exception because on one hand, the other Spider-Man do serve a narrative and character purpose and have a lot of great and heartfelt moments that make them seem genuine. But on the other hand, you can still feel how the head honchos at Marvel knew people would be screaming in theaters over this and how much money this movie was gonna make. So they have these incredibly awkward pauses after character reveals for the audience applause that are incredibly hard to watch on repeat viewings. It's like watching Friends without a laugh track. The inclusion of the multiverse in these films is beginning to feel intrusive more than anything, and very rarely does it actually help a movie like it did for Spider-Man. And even then it's frustrating because MCU Spider-Man has not had a single movie to himself that can stand alone as its own thing, which is criminal for a Spider-Man movie. Loki is the only MCU property so far where the multiverse doesn't feel intrusive, but instead does feel like it's a natural part of the plot. Even if I don't like Loki, I can give it that much credit. You know, just that much. This completely self-destructive plan that Marvel has is clearly not going to slow down anytime soon, and I highly doubt they're going to be improving very soon either. In just a few years, they managed to completely topple the empire they had carefully built for over a decade, and audiences are being more than vocal about their disapproval. Given how massive the MCU is, all of this cluttered multiverse junk in conjunction with the sheer quantity of bad content has done more than enough to sour people on the idea of the multiverse, and you'd be hard-pressed to find people who don't cite Marvel as a reason for why they're sick of it. But believe it or not, these past few years of fumbling the bag were completely outdone by just one DC movie. The Flash is one of the worst movies I have ever seen, and I will not back down on that. I have watched a lot of movies, but very few of them make me genuinely angry like this one does. It's not just because the film is a completely incompetent, ugly dumpster fire that stars one of the most hateable people in Hollywood. Its mere existence was being kept on life support while the current idiot-in-chief at Warner Bros. Proceeded to trample on and scrap a plethora of promising and finished products in the hopes that the Flash would make all of that money back. It's the fact that it's all of those things and also has one of the most intrusive, convoluted, and stupid integrations of the multiverse I've ever seen in the motion picture that also exploits dead people for fan service. Disregarding how much of a mess the DCEU already is, the Flash tackling the multiverse and reality-changing events is nothing new for the character. However, for the character's first ever solo outing in the DCEU, despite being introduced in previous movies and done very little justice, it probably would have helped if they kept things just a little more grounded and had less high stakes, especially if the multiverse story they attempt to tell is one of the worst I have ever seen. Nothing about how anything works in this movie makes a lick of sense. It contradicts itself at least twice. And to add on to this, it's trying to tell a personal story about Barry Allen, but unlike Spider-Verse, it constantly gets distracted with trying to cram in as much desperate fan service as humanly possible, to make up for its utter lack of substance. Look, it's Michael Keaton's Batman. Look, it's Supergirl. Look at how many things there are. It is such an insult of a film. Do you really expect me to believe Tom Cruise sat there with John Warner Brothers himself and praised the film without there being some kind of threat to his family at play? And the end of the movie just tops off this absolute fountain of shit, with quite possibly the most unearned, shallow, hollow, disgustingly pandering, ugly pieces of CGI cameo slop I have ever had the displeasure of enduring. Not just because it's obvious what the intent of this scene actually is, but because of the decision to completely forsake ethics by digitally recreating Christopher Reeve's Superman for a f***ing cameo. I don't care if Reeve's family approved of this, I don't care if it's meant as a tribute. The moment you begin puppeteering the corpses of long dead actors for for the sake of shallow fan service and audience approval, you lose any ounce of respect I have. Hollywood is already trying to push for an increased usage of AI and digital technology to use the likeness of actors completely without their consent, and one of the main fears actors have, over the 100 other ethical problems that brings up, is for them to be digitally recreated and puppeteered by hack filmmakers. The pit that formed in my stomach upon witnessing this scene for the first time was debilitating. I won't hesitate to call this borderline evil, and I don't care how hot of a take that is. And this happened because The Flash is a multiverse movie, and instead of doing something creative or interesting with the multiverse or focusing more on the actual characters, they opted for a trashy fan service cluster that at best is completely forgettable, and at worst shows just how horrifying the distant future can be if Hollywood doesn't back down. This one single movie managed to outdo the past few years of Marvel completely self-destructing. It is an absolute abomination, and I'm immensely happy that it flopped. The MCU and The Flash are two of the largest high-profile examples I can think of where the concept of the multiverse has been completely abused for cheap thrills and easy cash. And while the MCU is the most responsible for the audience switch-up due to their insane output of content, both it and The Flash represent the absolute worst of the industry's greed and are completely and utterly incompetent with how they write these stories, while being completely transparent about why they actually do multiverse stories. It's just upsetting to see this previously niche concept get completely butchered like this in the mainstream. Even with films like Everything Everywhere All at Once and series like Invincible, despite being absolutely fantastic, a lot of people are writing them off simply because of the multiverse aspect, despite these being made with actual soul by people who legitimately care. Marvel has done irreparable damage to the concept of the multiverse. As much as I hate to say it, a lot of properties that began telling bad multiverse stories only really began popping up after Spider-Verse and Endgame, so I don't think it's a stretch to establish a link here. Now, let's calm down with the doom and gloom for just a second, and instead let's just have a bit of fun. Okay, I'm only really putting this here for shits and giggles. This is not a serious review of Sonic Prime. I just think it's objectively funny that Sonic the Hedgehog is now doing this. In all fairness, Sonic Prime isn't bad, but it's another case where the usage of the multiverse is just incredibly disappointing and they barely do anything with it. Like, bro, you have Sonic the Hedgehog literally running through different dimensions. You have the coolest possible concept for a Sonic show. How do you still find a way to make it boring and repetitive? You run out of air. You run out of air. You run over. The only interesting location is a city ruled by the 5 alternate versions of Eggman. The rest is just, whoa, a caveman dimension, whoa, a pirate dimension, all of different counterparts of the same 5 characters, and Jacksepticeye for some reason. It is the most creatively bankrupt multiverse story I have ever seen, and I can't even give it a proper review for that reason. It speaks for itself. However, while it may seem like multiverse stories are on the decline and that there's an overabundance of them, we really should not be forgetting the examples that do the concept justice in ways that are legitimately powerful and impactful. Because even though they're few and far between these days, they do still happen. After rewatching all of Adventure Time last year and rekindling my love for it, I was iffy about the idea of it continuing despite already doing that previously and nailing it. But Fiona and Cake really did surpass my expectations by tenfold. The multiverse was always a thing in the original Adventure Time series, but it certainly wasn't the main focus. Here though, it's used to great effect by doing exactly what I loved so much about Spider-Verse, going crazy with the concept but tying it to the themes of the show and the development of its characters. I'm so happy that this series exists and managed to do so much with only 10 episodes. And while it does get a bit unstable towards the end, the entire experience was absolutely worth it. And I love the way the show uses the multiverse to explore its characters in ways that are mature and equally beautiful. Fiona slowly realizing that she was happier living her mundane life and that the fantasies she yearned for are putting the people she loves in danger, and accepting that adult life can suck a lot but there are plenty of simple joys that make it worth living is incredibly well done, and it helps to make her stand out in comparison to Finn. And Simon finally getting the closure he deserves, coming to terms with and processing his grief, the multiverse essentially being a twisted teacher to help him finally move on, everything just feels right. And this is on top of already being an incredibly entertaining and tightly written series succeeding one of the best cartoons ever made. I wish I could say more, but I really want people to experience the series themselves, as it's genuinely one of the best shows I've watched all year. So with all of these properties in consideration, what is the multiverse problem? A suffocating number of multiverse stories either coincidentally happening at the same time or taking inspiration from one another that prioritize hollow excitement and hype as opposed to good character work and storytelling. And despite there still being good stories told using this concept, people are far less willing to give them a fair shot due to the oversaturation we've been exposed to for the last few years. I had no real conclusion plan for this video, I just wanted to talk about this topic because I found it interesting. Play Yakuza, I guess.